When the visitor approaches the Vitra Design Museum in the intention of going to see our new exhibition, Making Africa, first thing he will see is this piece of graffiti by a Senegalese graffiti artist, Doctor. This piece speaks about the exhibition very much, and it already addresses a lot of issues and themes that we're going to tackle inside and that we're going to see inside of the exhibition. The title of the work itself also speaks for the whole exhibition. It's I hope I get it right, in Wolof, which is a language in Senegal. It's de l'excité, and it means the future is today. And this is also something that we hope will transcend from this exhibition, if you want, and that we hope the visitors will take with them when they leave the exhibition, that they realize that there is another Africa, a new Africa, an Africa that is oriented towards the future, that has something to say about the future and has something to show, that has innovation, that has new solutions to offer, some innovations and solutions that we might not be aware of. We're at the beginning of the exhibition. We call it the prologue. The prologue is meant to really set the ground and make people think about three essential questions. One, what is design? Two, what is Africa? And three, what is African design? And all three are main issues that we need to be clear about before we actually, go along and enter this exhibition. Now, what is design? The notion of design, the definition of design that we follow in this exhibition is a very large one that goes way, way, way beyond, yet another chair, yet another table, or another, nice piece of graphic design. What we speak about in contemporary discourse in general is, we design processes, we design social interaction, we design services, we design infrastructure. So design covers a much larger field than it used to maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago in theory. What is Africa? Africa is a humongous continent, 54 countries, 2,000 or more than 2,000 languages and cultures, 1 billion inhabitants. How can we speak about one Africa? It's impossible. Now, if we wanted to do an exhibition on Africa, on the African design, we were bound to fail. It's impossible to cover the entire continent. It is impossible to speak about the African design. There is no such a thing. There is no such a thing as one Africa or one African. And what we're trying to do here in the prologue is we have this installation, this video installation, where we did a lot of interviews with practitioners and theorists from the entire continent who, try to address these issues. What is Africa? Who's African? How does Africa play into, their individual work or in their conception and notion of maybe themselves or their own identity, or also how is Africa represented outside of Africa? So they discuss all these issues. Sometimes they agree with each other, but sometimes they contradict each other, and that's exactly the point. The whole setup is meant to show the diversity, the multiplicity, the many voices of Africa. And finally, what is African design? Very obviously, since it is impossible to speak about one Africa, it is equally impossible to speak about one African design. And African design is definitely way, way, way larger and more and richer and more, it goes way beyond humanitarian design or recycling or arts and crafts, which is what we usually associate with African design. And so it is this change of perception, this change of perspective that we invite the visitor to take, that is very nicely transferred, if you want, by the work of this artist/designer, whatever you want to call it, Cyrus Kabir, Kenyan, and his series of sea stunners. Now, sea stunners are glasses that are made of found materials, and each of those sea stunners has, its own narrative, its own name, its own material, its own shape, its own way of looking. And a pair of glasses is obviously a very strong metaphor of how we look at things. And it's also something that maybe looks at us, and we enter this space and we see these glasses and they stare at us, or do we stare at them? And it's, it's this interesting conversation that starts, and that is also representative for the continent, because with the introduction of the internet and the social media, the conversation is no longer one way, but it's two ways, and it's on a very equal eye level. And this is something that we're trying to do here. We also address or the pieces that we show in this area of the exhibition address issues of representation. Who speaks about Africa and who's allowed to speak about Africa? We speak about stereotypes and about preconceptions, positive and negative. So this is what we're trying to do, and we're trying to invite this new perception, this new perspective, and once this general openness to the new perception or a new perspective is there, we invite the visitor to the rest of the exhibition.
My name is Cindy Sonyoni, aka Riot. I'm an independent graphic artist operating from Johannesburg, but originally I'm from Zimbabwe. In the exhibition I have two posters that are on show. The first poster that we actually see behind me here was actually for a documentary on Africa and different perspectives on Africa by the group called My Africa Is. So basically what they did is they saw my work online, they approached me based on the style of work that I do, and they asked if I would be interested in creating a poster that could promote this documentary called My Africa Is. And what was nice about this particular poster is I was given free rein to create a piece on what I thought the documentary was about.
So once the ground is set, if you want, in the prologue, we invite the visitor into the rest of the exhibition. The rest of the exhibition is basically along three large issues. We scrutinize and analyze the creative output, the creative work, and also the individual creative producer or creative professional by three large sets of questions. One, social belonging. Two, the environment, man-made and natural. And three, who am I, is always comes along with the questions, where do I come from, where am I going? So the past and visions of the future. Now the second room is dedicated to social belonging. Who do I belong to? Who do I want to belong to? Who do I not want to belong to? And oftentimes these questions manifest themselves in fashion or styling. Now fashion styling is, of course, they don't happen in the void. They're always embedded in a larger political, economic, social, cultural framework. And so this makes them interesting artifacts for a museum, a design museum, of course, to scrutinize and to analyze and observe. Now, what we see very often is our references to the past. This is something that we do in the exhibition in general. We make references to the first post-colonial era, where a young generation once already celebrated Africa, celebrated their independence, and celebrated, their right to a future. And there was this general optimism, this feeling of yes, now it's us, and an Africa that celebrates itself. There is a political power in it. This has a political. It is a political statement in some way, because Africa, is kind of associated with trauma rather than celebration. And I think this is something very interesting to witness. Now we have, for example, here we have this image from 1963 by Malik Sidibé, Nuit de Noël, which is a Christmas Eve in Bamako, and we see this couple, well-dressed couple, according to the fashion of the time, and they dance. We don't know what, maybe rock and roll, maybe twist. In any case, they look like any other couple in Paris, London, or New York, and that's exactly the point. They were very naturally, very self-confidently part of a larger global youth culture at the time. And now, while this early post-colonial generation took part in consuming this global youth culture, what we see nowadays is a general and global, very self-confident, not only consumption but even production of global culture, which is exemplified by something that I completely got obsessed with, and that's Happy by Pharrell Williams. Now, you might know that there was Happy. Pharrell Williams came out with that song, and then with his video where people dance, and then all of a sudden in February, March 2014, people started uploading their own happy videos from Reykjavik to Cape Town, from Tokyo to Los Angeles. And there are countless happy videos from wherever on YouTube and the internet. And of course, equally endless happy videos from Africa. And this is yet again, once again, this very self-confident, very natural, easy participation in what's considered a global youth hype, a youth culture hype. And the wonderful side effect of all these videos that we see in the internet is, you know, they're produced from the people, from those cities, and uploaded, and it's an image that they want to convey from their Africa. So it speaks very much about, you know, representation of Africa, and it speaks very much about, you know, an urban, young, middle-class culture that is very contemporary and that is as much a reality as, you know, maybe your other realities that you think are, you know, ubiquitous in Africa, which is hunger and corruption. Yes, we have hunger, we have corruption, we have beautiful sunsets in Africa, which is the usual tropes, but we also have a middle class that, you know, lives in the city and celebrates life. Room 3, as I said before, we're trying to tackle the work that we see in Africa and also the individual professional, creative professional, by 3 larger sets of questions. Now we, in this room, we have the second large set of questions, which is the environment. Natural, but mostly, of course, man-made environment. Now, the most influential and relevant thing happening on the African continent is the city. And the city is really something that you can see, references to the city are ubiquitous. You can see it in so much work. 2008, 2009 was when 50% of the world population turned to live in cities. Africa is not there yet, and Asia, they will reach this point by 2020. But what we see in Africa in terms of urbanization is that one, it's much more, it's much faster than anywhere else. The process of urbanization is much faster. And 2, we see a very high level of informality. Now, what is informality? Informality is, for example, an informal job, or the informal economy would be like anything that's not employed and, you know, wage earning jobs as we know them, but, you know, your small and micro entrepreneurs, your hustlers and people who make a daily living on, you know, the economic opportunities that they see. Now, this is, for example, informal economy. You have informal settlements, which is the more appropriate and modern and contemporary term for slum, for example. And more neutral also. Now, anything that's not regulated by some higher authorities. Of course, informality is not the solution for everything. It's oftentimes not a very benign environment for people to make their daily living. Quite the opposite. It's quite precarious, and yet it's full of energy. It's full of creativity, and one has to understand that informal economy is what makes the African continent drive, what makes the economy drive here, because 70% of the economy in Africa is informal. Now, we have to understand the power that is within this concept of informality, and we have to see the relevant information, the relevant suggestions and solutions that might be found or may be found in this concept of informality. For example, if you look at most African cities where there's no such a thing as public transport as we know it, but there are fleets of minibuses that are very self-organized, very autonomous, very flexible, reacting to, you know, offer and demand on how and where they navigate the city. And I think that's very interesting, because theoretically it shouldn't work, but it does work in a very efficient way. And this is something that we can learn for design, in design, because I think that informality is something that we will see very soon, also in the design realm. We have this great piece by 3 Kenyan artists two cogwheels, the big one being the formal city, shiny and glitzy, and the small one being the informal city, all rusty and corrugated steel, etc. But it is the informal city that drives the formal city, which is, a very nice translation and metaphor for what I've said before. I would also like to draw your attention to an interesting piece of infrastructure design, where a very interesting solution comes from Africa and has been exported into Europe even. M-Pesa is the most successful and most modern and contemporary and efficient mobile money transfer system, and it's strikingly simple and wonderful. I wish we had that. You pay an amount X to your M-Pesa agent in, for example, Nairobi. It comes from Kenya. It was introduced there in 2007. You pay an amount X, you send a coded text message to whoever is the recipient at the other side of the country, and this recipient goes then to their local, his or her local M-Pesa agent and gets the money, and the whole transaction is being billed via your phone bill, which is amazing and wonderful. And so, it's easy to pay your cab via text message in Kenya, and you cannot do that here. And in the beginning of 2015, the system M-Pesa was introduced in Romania, after it's been introduced in several African countries and Asian countries. So here you have African technology that made it into the world, and we will see a lot more of that. Now, what we also speak about here in this room is materials, techniques, that come, traditional techniques and materials like Asooke textiles, or like a Porky Heifer's nest that is inspired by birds and nests and nature, etc. We also speak about reused materials and techniques where we see the production of objects or houses or architecture, whatever, with materials that have been used once already and that are now being reused.
Hi, my name is Porky Heifer. I run a company called Vernacular Architecture and Design. That's what I believe in, and I believe that's the future of the world. It's a company of one. I come up with ideas myself, I make my own prototypes, and then I work with the best of class in that type of thing. So like with weaving, I work with the Blind Society. I work with blind people. With the splicing, I work with a very old family that's been in splicing and rope work for a very long time in Cape Town, centuries and centuries old. I make nests now. I used to be a product designer. I made lights and I made various things, but one of my products that I came up with in 2009 is the human nest.
So Origin and Future is the fourth section of the exhibition, where once again we tackle larger sets of questions, and here it is the question of where we come from and where we're going. So how does the past influence the creative output on the continent, and how do visions of the future also influence the creative output? And what we see here, and this is something that I really like about the installations, we see layers of time. So we have the pre-colonial influence, or works that are influenced by pre-colonial history on the very bottom, and then the next layer is the colonial history and how it feeds into the work of contemporary designers and artists. And then we have the more recent history, and then on top of everything we have visions of the future. Now, one piece that I find particularly striking is the one behind me, a wall hanging by a Ghanaian artist called El Anatui. What he does is he makes wall hangings with used bottle caps, and this is something that we would, traditionally refer to as recycling. Now, recycling, if we're honest, always has this kind of strange aftertaste of, yes, it's waste, but let's make the best out of it. So it always has this connotation of being waste. And now I can tell you, not this piece, but in general, pieces by El Anatui are being sold for $1 million and beyond. Now, how can we speak about waste if we can create pieces that are worth so much money. Now I do realize that El Anatu is an artist and his work goes by the laws of, you know, an art market, and we all know that this art market is gaga. And yet there's a very, very crucial and important message about how to use material. You know, he doesn't care about recycling. He couldn't care less about waste. That's not his attitude. Bottle caps are the material that he works with, period. I hear, I don't know if that's correct, but I hear that if he can't find them used, he will buy new ones, because bottle caps is what he makes his wall hangings from. And this is how we have to approach our waste problem and our heaps of waste in our landfills. Because if we don't start to realize that these are materials that we can use rather than waste, that we have to get rid of, we will not solve the problem. So we have to think beyond that. We have to think outside of the box. And this is a very crucial and important and central design question and issue, of course. And this is why I think this piece is particularly interesting and particularly important. And we find the same attitude in a lot of different other pieces that we find in the exhibition. And again, this is something that design could and should do in times of change, in times, you know, now, in the 21st century, where we're confronted with massive landfills that we produced as we went along, you know, in industrial production, in mass production in the 20th century. We also speak about the influences of colonial history, and there's one particular textile that is important in this regard, and that's so-called Dutch wax or wax print or Ankara, which is commonly associated as being typically African or typically West African, you know, very colorful prints. And yet most people would be surprised to know or to learn that the market leader is a Dutch company called Flisco, and it's actually a colonial product. Now, the younger history is, there's a very powerful and impressive, I think, example of this throne by Gonzalo Mapunda, which is made of discarded weapons that were used in a 20-year-long, very, very violent and bloody civil war. And then we have visions of the future. And there's one piece that I like to finish my guided tours with, and it's a scarf from the US-Nigerian label Ikire Jones, and it shows Paris in the year 2081 AD. And you know, this label, the collections and the pieces, the individual pieces always come with little narratives that they recount on the website. And the narrative that comes with this piece, with this scarf from Paris in 2081 is, you know, formerly they used to, you know, they used to carry backpacks with miniature Eiffel Towers as they tried to make their daily living, and everybody looked down to them and, you know, treated them badly. But now the visitors of the new Africa, tourists react to them in awe and in admiration, and when they appear, the groups of tourists open up and, you know, whisper, who are they? And cameras point towards them. And now, this is a bold statement, of course. You know, an Africa that is equal or even hegemonial is something that is unimaginable nowadays. And yet, design has the possibilities, and I think it has the responsibility to make bold statements about the future. Because let me tell you, Le Corbusier in 1921 in Paris, presenting his Pavillon de l'Esprit Nouveau, that was a bold statement about the future, and nobody would ever imagine at the time that modernism would make its way, and yet we're all there, you know. And I think it's something that design should do. They should reclaim responsibility for society, and they should make bold statements about the future. And this is where we are. Back to the beginning, the future is today, and it's actually really true. The future begins today, and we see already that this is happening. Something that our advising curator, Orkwe Weser, who's the director of Haus der Kunst in Munich and also directing artistic director of this year's 2015 year's biennial in Venice. Massively influential for the way how we approach things in this exhibition. And we have a quote by him at the end, of the very end of the exhibition, and he says about the future, he says, to think about the future is to think about one's own possibilities in the world. And I think this is exactly it.
I suppose that one reason why there's been a great deal of attention focused around different practitioners, whether it's writers coming out of Africa, whether it's the music, whether it's the artists, is that it's an incredible breeding ground of ideas. And I think those ideas are slowly emerging to greater visibility within the global framework. And I think that emergence is something that is important, and I'm very happy that the Vitra Design Museum is also curious and focusing on this question.